This is Trekosophy, the Star Trek Philosophy podcast. My name is Chris McGee, and I'm joined by hosts Ben McLean.
What up?
And William Allen.
How's it going?
And today we're going to be talking about Bajor and Cardassia. So, let's dig right on in. First topic, what are the analogs of Bajor and Cardassia in the real world history? Let's kind of break it up by time frames, such as ancient times. How would you guys consider Bajor in ancient times?
Well, Bajor and Cardassia are, of course, always these huge, they start as these huge star empires. The ancient Bajorans were supposedly able to fly all over their area of the Beta Quadrant. Aren't they in the Beta Quadrant? No, they're still in the Alpha Quadrant.
No, it's still in Alpha, yeah.
All over their area of the Alpha Quadrant in those sailing ships we saw on that one episode where Sisko built one. And so they communicated with several planets, had several colonies. Cardassia, as I understand it, actually developed warp travel before they did. And having developed warp travel, Cardassia was able to wipe them out pretty quickly and kind of take over. And Cardassia invaded. And I think there is an analog there to the Babylonian invasion of Jerusalem in 600 BC. And then again to the Roman conquest that came later, where, Bajor is not always Israel. Sometimes they're the Palestinians. But I think usually Bajor is supposed to be Israel, and Israel and or Christianity, and to a lesser extent Islam, but still somewhat Islam. But basically Bajor is usually the Abrahamic peoples, and Cardassia then would be the Babylonians and or the Romans, invading. And I think that is the story of ancient Bajor and ancient Cardassia that is hinted at through several episodes seems to fairly consistently indicate an analog to that history of the Bible. And that sets up the later metaphors where Bajor is usually Israel. And whether you like Israel or hate it, I think that's what the writers were drawing off of.
They're basically saying Bajor was like ancient Israel.
Yeah. Cardassia like Babylon, and then Rome.
And who? Okay.
Well, I mean, basically, this was the Star Trek that started to explore all the themes of religion that the others didn't get into as much.
That's right.
And you need a star system with a religion that isn't fanatical. In Earth history, there aren't a lot of analogs like that. Most of them that are deeply religious are fanatically religious.
Are you saying the Bajorans aren't fanatically religious? Because I'm pretty sure they are presented as fanatically religious through most of the show.
No, they are deeply religious, but there's a difference between being extremely religious and being fanatically religious.
Yeah, they don't go out of their way to wipe out other people because they don't believe in the prophets, for example.
Oh,
right.
Well, most of them don't anyway.
Okay, most of them. You're always going to find extremists in any group.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, definitely. That's true. But I think they are. Well, I'm not sure what exactly you're saying about Earth's history here. Either way, I mean,
actually, you know what? For all we know, maybe they are fanatical, because after all, the entire planet worships the prophets, right? So, except for the few that worship the Pawrays in secret. But so maybe they conquered all the other religions on the planet and converted them all into prophets worship.
Yeah.
For all we know.
The thing about Bajor that I think really is different from most everything else that happens in Star Trek is how Bajor alone really challenges the Federation's assumptions. But let's get into that when we get into the present day.
Yeah, yeah.
The next thing I think was the occupation.
Okay, so what about ancient times of Cardassia? You said would be like Babylon,
Yeah,
and you
Israel versus Babylon.
okay. All right, well then we can move on to the occupation now. This happened during a 30-year period just before Deep Space Nine happened. So, what would you say each culture was like then?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that the Cardassian occupation of Bajor is kind of an analog or metaphor for, in large degree, the German Nazi occupation of
Yeah, totally.
Europe and the Holocaust. Um, there are many direct analogs to actual events in the Holocaust in several episodes. Now, this isn't true for every episode and every writer, because I think some writers they like to occasionally reverse the situation and make the Cardassians a little bit more like the Israelis and the Bajorans more like the Palestinians, or like the Protestants versus the Catholics trying to get revenge for past persecution and things like that. But I think usually it's presented where Cardassia is Germany and Bajor is again the Jews. Um, Not that the Bajoran religion is a very good analog for the Jewish religion, but their role in history seems to be modeled after the role in history of the Jews.
Another interesting thing I've noticed in some of the episodes, whenever they try to make the Cardassians a little more sympathetic, show you that they're still, for want of a better word, they're still human, even though they're the bad guys. A lot of times I notice that the nice Cardassians, uh, when they talk of the occupation, it reminds me a lot of the European conquest of North America and how the Europeans treated the Native Americans.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think that's
Mm.
going on in there too, definitely for sure. I didn't think of that, but that's definitely going on.
Well, what
Um,
really got it for me was in a particular scene in Waltz was when Gul Dukat was, and by the way, of course, Dukat can easily be, you can see a parallel between him and, of course, Hitler. But,
Cortez in this case.
well, or he thinks of himself like that, you know. Now, he even said in that episode, you know, we were the superior race. Fate chose us to be superior over the Bajorans. Sounds to me like the Nazis, you know, how they considered themselves a superior race over Jews.
Yeah, yeah, and that is one of the instances where I think they're definitely going for Nazism, and the DS9 is great because of how it applies the wisdom of history to 20th century situations, and and even I think helps us develop our thoughts and bring us even into post 20th century situations. Um, One of the things I think a lot of people don't get about early DS9 is the severity of the occupation in the story that the writers are trying to tell. I hear a lot of people who say Major Kira, for example, is just whiny and and stuff, and I'm just thinking,
She's almost always shouting in
yeah,
a lot of the
her
early episodes.
people just went through the Holocaust, and
Mm-hmm.
that kind of makes her a someone who is nearly a Holocaust victim, you know, and I that isn't shown visually on the show, and I think that would be, I think, a major flaw and a legitimate criticism of early DS9, that they did not do a good job of establishing the world of the occupation clearly. You know, they
Yeah, that's true.
they should have had you, I don't know, discover some torture chambers or something um, early
Well,
on,
this
rather
If
than
that was
just
the message they wanted to get across, then yeah, I kind of agree with you there.
this was them easing into the concept of dystopia in the future, because most of the time for Star Trek, for both of the first two series, the Earth was perfect, things were perfect. Now we're exploring space and making it perfect, and
yeah.
everything worked out in the end. They wanted to show a little bit more gritty, a little bit more realistic, but if they had tried too hard and pushed too hard with the first seasons of Deep Space Nine to show how horrifying it really was out there, you'd you'd end up with the fans hating Deep Space Nine as
Yeah.
much as Battlestar Galactica fans hate that
That's
remake.
true. It would have been almost too much of a departure from Roddenberry's vision.
Yeah. That might be true. But we end up, you can't make everybody happy, and so we end up with people because Kira acts in what I regard as a realistic way for someone in her situation and with her background. Um, and the other thing, those same people say they hate Keiko O'Brien, and Keiko O'Brien is another woman who acts, I think, in a realistic way. Um, she seems kind of whiny, but I think it's realistic.
I tend to agree with you there too. I hear about all these people complaining about Keiko O'Brien, and yeah, she does complain a lot, but guess what? Wives do that, you know.
Yeah, that's the
Especially
thing.
military wives.
Yeah, there
Oh,
you go.
for
Yeah,
sure, for
that's
sure. No offense to any military wives. We're just talking about real life. Um, and okay, so that's the occupation.
Yeah, and that leads us into the early seasons of Deep Space Nine, just after the occupation, but before the Dominions show up. And I remember Kira. I think she said something in one of the first episodes about how we just got rid of the Kardashians, and now who comes in the Federation? It's like how are we to trust you being better than them? So that's one of the reasons why she was so angry. She wanted to bring Bajor back on her own and not have to, seek outside help.
Yes, and that sort of thing has actually happened in the case. I mean, that sort of attitude has been produced in several situations in history. Um, one
Oh yeah, absolutely.
one example that I think of with that particular line is the French alliance with the United States in the Revolutionary War, because France treated her colonies even worse than England treated hers, and there were a lot of people who were very suspicious of this French. They would have said, "quote help," unquote. You know, is it really help, or is it exchanging a British taskmaster who at least who at least are a little bit closer to us as former English colonies for a French, for a foreign tyranny, at least it might be better to stick to the devil you know. Some of them, some of
Hmm.
the colonials were saying in the Revolutionary War, who were suspicious of France. And that also happened in the case of a lot of the Texans. The Texans having rebelled against Mexico.
Oh yeah,
Some
yeah.
of them were opposed to statehood in the United States because for the with the similar attitude to what's her name, Kira. Let's go it alone. We don't want these foreign powers being involved in our internal affairs.
Mm.
That was the attitude of many of the Texans. I'm kind of glad that attitude didn't wear out. I think America's better for having Texas as a state, whatever you think of certain Texan presidents. But let's see. Oh yeah, the I think the early seasons of DS9 are, I think, trying to using as an analog, though, mainly the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, um, and the the sides switch up quite a bit. Um, I think in some episodes the Bajorans are like the Israelis, and the Cardassians are like the Palestinians. And in some other episodes, it's the other way around, where the Bajorans are the Israelis and the Cardassians are the Palestinians. Or did I cross that? It's the one way, and then it's the other way in different episodes in different situations. But I think it is really trying to say a lot of stuff about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and why that area of the world has always been a source of trouble for the rest of the world. It has always been the place where empires are destroyed um, throughout history, not just in our modern times when we figured out that there's
That's
this
right.
shiny oil we need. It's not the oil that makes that a center of war. It's always been a center of war before we even needed the oil.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, I think, where they are going a lot of the time, and especially when they bring religion into it. Bajor, like Israel, um, has a racial right of return to Bajoran refugees in other areas, and that is directly based on the Israeli right of return for Jews to Israel. Um, I mean, that is the direct analog in real world history, and in fact, it's still going on. So it's even current events, though it's not going on with uh, the same vigorous pursuit that it was in the early years. But there's still a right of return for racial Jews to Israel, um, and the Bajorans, many of them, I think a clear majority of the Bajorans are religious in a spiritual sense uh, for the prophets and the Bajoran religion, but they all wear the earring, whether they are religious or not.
It's true.
And I think that is very much how politics in the early years of Israel definitely were. Um, your family has Passover, whether you believe in Yahweh or not, because you're a Jew. There are customs that, as Jews, you observe even if you think the religion is BS and you're a huge Richard Dawkins fan.
Or
And
for the rest of us, it's analogous to Christmas. Even if you're not a
Mm-hmm.
Christian, you still celebrate
That's what I
Christmas.
was
It's
about
gone
ready to
from
say.
being
Took the words out of my mouth.
oh yeah, definitely. Except it's more than just a festival that's once a year for them, though. The Jews, if you know very much about Jewish culture, they have to wear the prayer shawls and have their heads covered, and there's all these rules. And the Bajoran earrings are about that. The earring represents their unity as a society, and it's very interesting if you read the. This is going to get into the. I put after as one of the topics, so I'm skipping ahead here. But if you get into the DS9 relaunch novels that I'm in the middle of reading right now, spoiler alert, Kira gets excommunicated, and
Hmm.
as a result, she's no longer allowed to wear the earring.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, you'll notice that Lieutenant Rowe, they make a big deal out of the earring in the one episode. Lieutenant Rowe is on
Ensign Rowe.
TNG. Ensign Rowe, excuse me.
Yeah.
She's become a lieutenant by the time of the another spoiler alert. Sorry, she's become a lieutenant by
Okay,
the
that's
time of
interesting.
the DS9 relaunch novels.
You'll have
Uh,
to tell me about that later on. Last time I saw, she was joining the Maquis. But anyway.
Yeah, she joined the Maquis, and then she joined the Bajoran security forces and became a lieutenant
Okay. Okay.
in the new government.
That was because the Maquis got
Wiped out.
reabsorbed into culture with the Dominion War. The Maquis became our skirmishers.
Yeah, let's. We're getting to where
Yeah,
are
that's going down a rabbit
Well,
hole here. Okay.
before we leave the early seasons thing, I'd like to point out another one that had always struck me as interesting when you watch it. Even though the Cardassians are not a major intergalactic player the way the Klingons and the Romulans are, for this
uh,
particular sector,
hold on. The Cardassians are not a major intergalactic player anymore. They used to be, and
That's right.
that is a major factor in their psychology. So okay, now go on.
I
Okay.
remember that there was a next gen episode when Card was held hostage, and he was talking about how in the past Cardassia was known for its arts and things other than their military, and then the military took over, and so things kind of went downhill.
All right. Well, I mean,
Roman Empire.
until this series, the Cardassians were secondary to Klingons and Romulans as being the major significant threat in the galaxy. But whenever you watch Deep Space Nine, it always struck me more. It reminded me so much of the United States and the Soviets having their little Cold War, semi-hot war fighting over Afghanistan, with the Bajorans as the Mujahideen.
Yes, yes,
An odd kind. I mean, they were a culture we weren't too familiar with, but we were trying to respect. They didn't really like us. They just hated the other guys more.
yes. um, and that brings up a couple things that are definitely worth talking about. One is that the Federation is almost always the United States. I mean, not even they're not even the Western world or anything like that. They're
Yeah, pretty much.
the U.S. of freaking A. That's who they are.
Based in San Francisco.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, they're not even the USA. They're San Francisco. No, just kidding. No, they're the USA, and they've always been in every series the USA. Even the original series, which prided itself so much in having the internationalist all-star cast with the token black female who didn't do anything useful, um, except look hot. What passed for hot in the '60s, but even then, they were still the USA because if you remember, the USA is supposed to be the melting pot of the world, and it's sort of the rest of the world in miniature. We were just talking about Orson Welles earlier. He makes that point in one of his World War II broadcasts how the United States is a model of how the world ought to be because it's got all the different cultures and nationalities and races and religions um, living together in the same society, having occasional skirmishes, but nothing that a court or an election can't handle. At least that was Wells's view, or Norman Corwin's view, writing the script for Wells, or whatever. So anyway, that's what I'm saying. The Federation is just about always the United States, and particularly the United States foreign policy, especially. Um, and then Cardassia is the Soviets. Whoever the big bad guy is of the week in Star Trek in every series is usually the Soviets. Um, the Romulans were the Soviets. The Klingons were the Soviets. Now the Cardassians are the Soviets. It's kind of evolved over time who's the Soviets. But yeah, I think the Dominion really become the Soviets pretty quickly.
Okay, well, that leads us into the Dominion War seasons of Deep Space Nine then. So you believe the Dominions are basically like the Soviets of their time?
Well, the Dominion's complicated, and I was going to have a whole episode just on them
Well, we can
late,
certainly do that in future
later.
episode.
So I don't want to get too deep into
Okay,
them.
yeah, we didn't want to.
But I might just say real quick that my view of the Dominion is that they are a parody of the medieval model of feudalism. In medieval society, it was all based on a hierarchy of the king and the pope being at the top, and then you had and then you had the dukes and lords under him, and then you had the serfs under them, and and so as the royalty, we have the founders, and then as the dukes and serfs, and I mean no, the dukes and lords, we have the military. That's why the dukes and lords. That's who the dukes and lords were. They were the military, and that would be the Vorta and the what are they called? The soldier guys.
Jem'Hadar.
The Jem'Hadar.
Jem'Hadar, right? The Jem'Hadar. They're the dukes and lords, and then everybody else is the serfs, and it's pretty much the medieval power structure.
Well, I can
Uh,
kind of see that, but the one that I remember that in one of the interviews with the writers and the producers of the show, they're talking about how there's basically three main races in there, and of course you've already mentioned what they are, but it didn't seem like they followed a hierarchy exactly. Of course, obviously the founders are on top; they're the gods. The Vorta and the Jem'Hadar worship them as gods, but it was kind of like they're the ones that they're the puppet masters. They're the ones pulling the strings, while the Vorta and Jem'Hadar do all the work. Jem'Hadar are the slick, car salesmen. They're the ones that go from planet to planet saying, "Hey, you guys want to be a part of our team here?" And if you don't, well, that's when the Jem'Hadar come in and say, "Well, you're going to be whether you like it or not, or we're just wiping you out."
yeah, well, that was a kind of pattern of medieval conquest. That seems to be how the Crusades worked. Um, uh,
I don't know if it'll make sense, but the thing about what the Dominion always struck me as is they weren't just the Soviets. They were the Red Menace, capital R, capital M, that sinister thing that McCarthy believed in. And when you watch some of the episodes later in the war, the changelings
oh, the
can
changelings.
be anyone. They can be
Yeah,
there
the
among
the
us.
changelings are the Red Menace. Yeah, you're
And
right.
it's different from the Red Menace we faced because in the case of the Dominion, they're really there.
Yeah, McCarthy was right. Oh no, that's a great science fiction. That's a great science fiction. Well, it's not that McCarthy was right actually, because McCarthy isn't right even in the Star Trek analog. McCarthy, I think both in Star Trek and in real life, McCarthy was right that there are people trying to undermine America and the free world from the inside. But he was wrong to accuse Lucille Ball. That was just stupid.
Yeah, McCarthy was the sort of the living embodiment of that old just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you line. He
Yeah,
was paranoid.
but they were out
Of
to
course,
get
I'm
you.
paranoid. Everybody's out to get me.
Yeah, there was some real danger from agents working against the United States from inside, and there always have been. Probably from 1776. I mean, you remember Benedict Arnold.
Right.
Um,
Well, I don't really count him. He was still technically British. He never really did the
well, he
sleeper
was a
thing.
he was a traitor, and yeah, he did the sleeper thing. He was about to hand over Fort Ticonderoga to the British when Washington and Gates were having him in charge of it. Um, he didn't resign his commission. He tried to use it to undermine the army from within. So yeah, he was totally doing the sleeper thing.
Okay.
Um, I mean, there's a reason why his name has become another word for traitor. I mean, he really was a real traitor. Um, the thing is, though, that even though there are real dangers out there, I think this is part of the point of those episodes are trying to make. Even though there are real dangers out there, some of them you just have to live with. Sometimes they're out there, and that's just too bad. There's nothing you can do about it because protecting individual liberties is more important than ridding us of these sorts of insidious people. And I think that's the point they're trying to make. And I think it's really unfortunate. I think as an anti-communist myself, I think it's terribly unfortunate how much McCarthy has, I think, possibly um, permanently damaged the ability to actually talk about communism um, without sounding like a nutcase. Because I mean, there's legitimate stuff about communism to be said about what is a communist philosophy, or where philosophies in politics today might borrow from Marx, and stuff like that. Um, that we can't have a real, honest, open debate about Marxism because Marxism is now pejorative rather than merely wrong. You know the difference there.
Right.
And I'd rather be able to say that Marxism is wrong without it being an insult, because then I can get the ideas out more clearly.
We
But
can
yeah,
probably delve a little deeper into the Dominion in a future podcast, maybe, and
right.
really, really compare it with, McCarthy and all that. Which, by the way, we probably should have, for those listening out there that don't know who McCarthy is, probably should kind of describe who he was in brief, maybe, and why we're comparing him
Oh,
in this
yeah. He
fashion.
was a U.S. Senator from the 1950s in charge of a series of Senate hearings to root out potential spies and traitors who were working for the Russians, who had just beaten us into space. And it got bad where if you didn't show up and testify and name names and point out someone, you
Yes,
were
like
convicted in the court of popular opinion for being a commie yourself.
like Jack Sparrow. I will name fingers and point names.
Right.
All right, well, let's go on to the Dominion War itself here. Would you say that it's real world history analog is more like the World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam War, something else?
Right. Well, Cardassia, of course, I think quickly becomes, immediately upon the Dominion taking over, it
Hmm.
becomes an analog for two different situations in history. One is that Gul Dukat wants to be Hitler, and he
He wants to
uses,
be loved by everyone.
yes, and that was Hitler's big deal, and he uses a past defeat, Cardassia's former glory and all that stuff, to try to rebuild the idea of Cardassians as a master race, and the way Hitler used Germany's defeat in World War One. So that's going on. But on the larger political scene, Gul Dukat never actually gets that kind of power because of the Dominion. And the Dominion, um, Gul Dukat wants to be a fascist. He ends up being more like a communist because the Dominion is very much like the Soviets in how they administer their provinces. And the Federation is very much like the United States in how they administer their satellite nations. You know what I mean by satellite nations?
Yeah.
Um, Nations that would get wiped off the map if the U.S. military wasn't there keeping them in existence, or if not there, then carrying a very big stick to uh, you know big enough that we don't have to actually be there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's been Israel's situation for a long time. They have been building up their military steadily so that they aren't as dependent as they once were. But for a long time, Israel only remained on the map because of the United States, and to a lesser extent the UN, but mostly the United States. And Bajor is like that in the first few seasons of DS9. And Cardassia goes from feeling like it is the Soviet Union to feeling like it is a province of the Soviet Union, like Korea or North Korea or North Vietnam, uh, during the during the dominance of the International Communist Party over world politics.
Or to use your World War II example, Gul Dukat wanted to be Hitler, and he ended up being Mussolini.
Yeah, I'm not quite. I'm not up on my World War II enough to know exactly what the
Well,
relationship between Hitler and Mussolini was. Could you enlighten us on that point if you know anything about it?
well, I mean, the thing about, I mean, people do the German analogs so often as far as Nazis go, but there's something about the way Cardassia is set up that reminds me more of that Italian flavor of fascism. You know, Mussolini, the trains always ran on time. Even if they didn't, they ran on time.
Yeah,
And
that's
a
the one
lot of
thing I do remember about Mussolini.
the strength of Cardassia's military isn't actually from its military; it's from its spy organization, which is better than anybody else's. And the Italian, I mean, the German secret police were not all that secret. They kicked down doors and they stomped on people. They weren't very subtle. The
Yeah,
Italian
I mean,
secret
we
police
hear
had that.
about them all the time. I mean, you know.
Yeah, yeah. The Italian secret police had that little flair for subtlety, that little mafia flavor or whatever running with them. So in a lot of ways, Cardassia always tended to remind me of Italy. Still a fascist, still kind of the bad guy, but not, you know, the living embodiment of evil that Nazi Germany was.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Mussolini was still pretty evil. I mean,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not saying that. I'm just
he
saying.
wasn't maybe quite as evil as Hitler, but he was still pretty evil. There's kind of a scale of evil, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
Google's scale of evil, where you remember that?
No, not
It's
Google.
no.
been a
That's
while.
Oh, okay.
funny.
Well, Google, when they were taking a lot of heat for establishing a search engine, Google.cn in China, which would collaborate. They would say cooperate. I would say collaborate with the communist government in China to censor the internet, so that Google, instead of somebody else, would be the dominant search engine in China. Which means we want to be there instead of Microsoft being there, so it's okay. A lot of people would quote Google's "Don't be evil" motto and say, "Look, this is evil," and in my opinion, they were right. Yeah, that's pretty evil. Um, you know, cooperating with the Chinese Communist government to censor the internet and suppress helping them suppress the Chinese people's free speech. That was not acceptable. Well, Google tried to make an argument that there's a scale of evil, and in Google's estimation, letting Microsoft get the kind of market dominance that would result from Microsoft's Bing becoming the Chinese search engine would outrank, in the long run, would outbalance Google, whatever evil Google might be doing by being there. And the idea was that this would continue to give Microsoft dominance over the world's technology, and thus in the long run, more Windows, more tyranny, more fear, uncertainty, and doubt from Richmond in the tech world. And I can kind of see that argument a little bit, but Microsoft, I'd rather stick with Microsoft being the devil we know than the communist devils over there in China. That's just not acceptable. And Google eventually found out that even as much as they wanted to work with the communists, they just couldn't. You can't work with the communists. You give a mouse a cookie, he's going to ask for a glass of milk. So eventually they got kicked out of China, and now the Chinese have their own search engine that nobody else uses, but only and you can find out what a great and wonderful thing the Chinese Communist Party is anytime you want. But it's in Chinese, so Western people aren't exposed to it. Anyway, so that's my brief history of Google's scale of evil, though, is a lasting result of that that people will laugh about a little bit for probably for some decades to come. The ethics department will probably have posters about that every now and then. In a lot of colleges, the scale of evil, Google versus Microsoft versus China. Anyway, this is a bit of a tangent. But anyway, on the scale of evil, we're going to get to that a little bit later. Who is the most evil? That comes a little bit later.
Yeah, actually, I was going to now we're pretty much beaten to death the Dominion and the Dominion War. What do you think? Obviously, there is no canon after Deep Space Nine series, but there are some novels, and of course, we can also speculate what some analogs would be after the series. What is Bajor and Cardassia like now? Obviously, Cardassia is kind of in ruins, right after the show.
Yeah. I was thinking that we would expect to see a relief effort to help the Cardassians, and this actually happens a little bit in the in the relaunch novels.
You think the
Which
Federation comes out to help them get back on their feet?
them and the Bajorans.
Oh, okay.
The Bajorans actually, yeah, the Bajorans would actually help Cardassia. They actually do a little bit. The Federation is always suspicious that they're not helping them as much as they could otherwise because of all the prejudice and stuff. There's a lot of people in Bajor who think they shouldn't be helping them, but the government thinks so, and Kira thinks so, and yeah. So I would expect a situation, though, a little bit like assuming the Klingons. What was happening with the Klingons at the end of DS9? Um,
They were
yeah,
celebrating over the corpses of the Cardassians.
right. And I'm guessing the Klingons would want to pick a fight before very long, and we might end up with a situation a lot like the the situation in Berlin after World War II, where we've got the different powers have sort of divided up Berlin, and suddenly the the Russians decide that a bridge is having all the bridges are having technical difficulties, and so as a result, no more traffic is going to be able to come across from the rest of Germany into Berlin because yeah, the bridges all having technical difficulties. And when will they repair it? Oh, we're not sure. Well, if they don't get repaired now, the people are going to starve, and in the winter they're going to freeze to death. Well, sorry, the bridges are out, and there's nothing we can do about that. And so we might end up with a standoff between the different powers fairly quickly. The Romulans, yeah, that's one thing. Not just the Klingons, but the Romulans. Over the helping the Cardassians, we might end up with a standoff a lot like the one in Berlin, and we could end up with, something like the Berlin airlift happening, which would be a really fascinating story. That would have been a great subject for a Star Trek movie, a Star Trek analog for the Berlin airlift. That just would have been an awesome story. I wish they would have done it, but no DS9 movie. I'm just, yeah.
Not yet.
Well, the actors are getting too old, aren't they, to do a DS9 movie?
They can always do like a 20 years after special. I think it's
Yeah,
about
there
time
could
we
be
started seeing
something.
some of those.
Hmm.
Now, the one thing I've always wondered about, we talk about the major players, but the one thing I've always wondered about after the war has always been what happens to the Breen.
That's an interesting point. Yeah.
They were one of those out of left field. They've always kind of been around as a background alien. Nobody knows much about them. And then, they can one-shot any Romulan or Klingon
They
ship
got the
they
most
come
powerful
across.
ships. Yeah, there.
So, I mean, I can see the Klingons going after the Breen, and while you're trying to help Cardassia, you're distracted by the fact that the Klingons are off starting another war.
Yeah. Yeah, that could happen. The Breen always have reminded me of those aliens in all those like weird like B movies. I mean they or those old timey sci-fi. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean, they look so retro, you know. And
Yeah, there's not much thought going on into their costumes. I can tell you
I
that
was
much.
just, I
they
was,
got
Princess
a
Leia's,
yeah.
I was so
The bounty hunter
surprised.
costume from
Bounty
Star
hunter.
Wars is on discount, so they bought a bunch of them.
I was, yeah, I was so surprised that that these things that look like they don't belong in a film of this caliber, not that I would have wanted to get rid of them. They were just too much fun. All the wisecracks about not knowing what's under their helmet and their planet being frozen, and then their planet not being frozen and actually being a desert, and them just wearing the freeze suits to weird everyone out. It's just
That was the thing about them
too much
that
fun. There's just too much fun going on.
that was one of the old original series episodes. It was the Corbomite maneuver. The very powerful, sinister, scary alien. And in the end, they find out he's just a very small, friendly guy who's protecting his planet by faking people out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, the bluff deal. Yeah, I thought it was really a mistake for them to imply that Jadzia got to see what was under one of their helmets, or was it Esri? Dax, whichever
Well,
Dax.
I do remember that and we saw Ducat and Kira went to go rescue Ducat's child. They had to wear one of the Breen's costumes, so obviously both of them, had to see what they looked like underneath.
Yeah, and I think that was a huge mistake on the writer's part.
Yeah, it's kind of
Because
oops.
yeah, I mean, because that robs them of so much of their mystique without giving us any answers at all. So that was just an epic fail from a writing perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's one of the downsides to Star Trek. I mean, I love Star Trek. It's still my favorite. Don't get me wrong. Trekkies, please don't kill me. But they do tend to, almost by accident, leave these tantalizing little plot threads that will forever be completely ignored. Let's at least do the basic good or evil rundown. That ought to be fun.
Yeah, and let's get the Garrick question in there. At least we have to have a Garrick episode at some point.
Garrick's got to be in every episode. We gotta mention him at least once in every episode.
Well, we've got to at least tell a lie in every episode then.
Oh my! Okay, I'm gonna have to.
That is Garrick's
Working
best
that.
line. That was Garrick's best line. I mean, the doctor asks him at the end of an episode, "You've told me your past, and everything you've told me contradicts everything else. Which parts of it were true?" "My good doctor, they were all true."
Oh my gosh, you've got the voice nailed.
Garrick's my favorite.
Including the lies?
Especially the lies.
That was great. Yeah, I can do voices. I don't. I can't do that many Star Trek voices. Let me see if I can do my my Odo voice. Let's see. Cardassian rules, Federation rules, Bajoran rules, they're all meaningless to you because you have a personal code that's always mattered more. And I'm sorry to say, you're in slim company. Did I do Odo? Okay, I need to work on it.
That was good. For my Odo,
Not
all I
bad.
usually do is just go, "Her." That was my Odo.
Herm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same voice as Rorschach from Watchmen.
Yeah.
All right, so are Bajorans evil or good? Are Cardassians evil or good? And I don't mean Kardashians either. We know they are all evil. So
It's more
Cardassians.
Cardassia and Bajor than the individual people that I meant, because obviously there's very few races in Star Trek where every member is evil or every member is good. Even the Borg have a really hot 7 of 9 who isn't evil, at least not evil all whatever. Anyway, well, there are some people who would argue with that. They'd say she was evil because she ruined Star Trek forever or whatever, but I don't know.
Yes, because Star Trek never had scantily clad women just there to be eye
Yeah,
candy
right.
before she came along.
Oh,
Right.
just never ever pilot episode. Anyway, um, what I meant was Well, say if you're looking at the larger galaxy from the perspective of the other powers in the galaxy and the common people of those other powers, uh, because I mean, Reagan talked about the Soviet Union being an evil empire, and we generally think of Romulus as an evil empire, and also before DS9, we tended to think of the Klingons were an evil empire in TOS, and then in TNG they were a an evil empire that's had an intervention and is kind of in recovery mode. And then in DS9, some of the bad guys literally become good guys. In that one episode of Blood Oath or whatever it is, the bad guys from TOS literally become good
Oh
guys.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Um, so
I'm not
so
sure if they'd be good guys. They're just acting on their own interests. But
they're good guys. They're trying to stop
we're
the
rooting for them. Let's put it that way.
yeah, the albino really is a really bad guy.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, so they're trying to be superheroes, right?
And it could also just be a simple case of we didn't understand the differences between us and them, which made them the villains. Give us 30 years and 3 more series, and all of a sudden we understand Klingons.
I don't think we
And
ever understand Klingons. But I mean, what is it that Cisco says? You need a Klingon to handle a Klingon,
Yeah.
right.
Um, but we've come to appreciate the the positive aspects of the Klingons and their warrior culture. Um, and in order to do that, the writers had to invent the Klingons and their warrior culture all over again, so that instead of dressing in gold lame, now they look like heavy metal rockers with lobsters on their heads. Um, but they had to reinvent the Klingons in order to have something there to respect. But yeah, but basically, I'm getting off topic on the Klingons. My point is, we think of the different powers generally in terms of a basically good or basically evil power, and there are some people who would say that Bajor, because it is the locus of war, it really is the locus of war with Cardassia and war with the Dominion. Um, that Bajor is actually not that good of a power. I mean, I think they should have shown it more, but I think probably back in the Federation, there's probably a lot of people who are saying, why are we expending all these resources on helping the Bajorans who probably aren't even going to help themselves and certainly don't have the same philosophy as we have about the universe, given that they're into religion and we're not. And it's all this stuff. So I mean, there's a lot of what like look at the I don't know. That's probably maybe that's not that good of a question. I mean, we're pretty much biased in favor of Bajor, I think, aren't we?
Well, obviously,
Yeah.
I mean, you can't watch Deep Space Nine without being biased in favor of Bajorans.
The thing about Bajor is it kind of serves as sort of a moral mirror for everybody else. It shows the flaws in the Federation view because for all of the Federation's enlightened ideals about equality and freedom of religion,
It's a very good point.
they dismiss. You get to see that the Federation actually is a little bit bigoted against primitive cultures, and it shows some of the arrogance of the Federation. It shows the darker side of whoever they deal with. So I don't know if that's because Bajor is just. I think it's more because Bajor is good and there's some sort of ultimate good that nothing else measures up to in their own small way, as opposed to being just evil that lures everything down a dark path.
I remember hearing a rabbi give an explanation for the Holocaust and why Jews in history have been so conquered and persecuted and killed so much in history. And he says that the Jews, whether we like it or not, are stuck being the guilty conscience of the world. And that people look at the Jews and see themselves, and they don't like what they see. And I thought that was pretty deep stuff there.
That's interesting. I like that.
And I think that's what you're saying the Bajorans are like, and I think that really plays pretty heavily into the whole Bajorans are Jews thing.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit different. With the Bajorans, it's not so much we see ourselves in them and hate our flaws. It's just looking at them, we have flaws. Because the Federation has a mixed history with being good to other aliens. Sometimes we kill them, sometimes we have them join the Federation. But the Bajorans bring out that...
I have to say that with the William Shatner voice. Sometimes we kill them, and sometimes we have them join the Federation. With the pauses in there.
Well, I mean, remember the old salt vampire that Kirk and crew blasted, the last of its kind, and they eradicated it. And then 3 episodes later, there's the Horta. It's killing off colonists. It's the last of its kind. They communicate with it.
I don't remember the salt vampire, but I do remember the Horta. Wasn't the salt vampire one of those villains that got reused on Lost in Space a few weeks later?
I think so. It had suction cup fingers, and it was clamping onto people's faces. When you looked at it, you saw the most beautiful woman from your past. And it was
the very first episode that ever aired.
Oh, wait a minute. What? Really? I thought the Menagerie was the first episode that ever aired. The Cage with Captain Pike.
No, that never aired.
It never actually aired. It was the first one made, but it never actually got aired.
Oh, well, I thought that wasn't the first one aired, the one with Gary Mitchell becoming a god?
That was the first one filmed, but not the first one aired.
Oh my gosh, you guys know way more about this Trek early trivia than I do. Well, it sounds like that one sounds like you've got a checklist of all the stuff that needs to be in a 60s sci-fi show, Alien, and you've just checked them all off, you know?
Oh, it's fun to go back and watch the old 60s stuff and see things get reused. I've seen the evil space flowers reused in, I think, like 2 films and 3 different series. You know, the ones that gave Spock emotions, if you remember that episode.
Mm-hmm.
They
Vaguely.
Spray you with pollen and you become carefree hippies.
Wasn't everybody on Star Trek already a carefree hippie except Spock?
I think they were all Zeitgeisters, so it was a little bit different.
Okay.
But, yeah, Day of the Triffids had the same flower as the space villain that was invading Earth. This space flower showed up so often in that part of the 60s.
Yeah, and I guess that's supposed to be drugs?
Sometimes I wonder about that, because a lot of times sci-fi guys just want to tell a cool story. They're not trying to draw an allegory. They just want to do something cool. Yeah. And later on, people add he was really
it was
symbolizing...
about sex and drugs and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, well, where were we? Oh, yeah. Bajor's pretty much good. Well, Cardassia.
Yeah.
The thing about Cardassia...
They used to be good, but now they're evil, especially now that they've joined the Dominion. But maybe now that the Dominion's defeated, now they're back to being good again. We don't know because we don't have any canon after the show.
Yeah, well, the thing about Cardassia is supposedly they have these sort of noble qualities that actually have sort of been corrupted and perverted into the evil Cardassia Empire. You know, one is that they really strongly believe in family. You know, I mean, they're all about family, and another is that they are very, very detail oriented. They are excellent organizers.
And conversationalists.
And great conversationalists. Yes, that's one thing. Another thing is pretty much universal to all Cardassians. You never notice a Cardassian who stays silent. They don't do that.
That's right.
On an individual case-by-case basis, they're all likable, and it's one of those situations where, under other circumstances, you'd be friends with them.
But
Okay, in the
Gul
middle.
Dukat is not likable.
Okay, by the end, Gul Dukat.
And I'm
he
not
went
sure
off the
I
deep
want to be
end.
friends with
was
Garrick.
never
He could stab me in the back before I know it.
See,
Yeah,
Gul Dukat. Well,
he
I
was
mean, if
never likable. I'm sorry, never. There's never a
there
point when he was likable.
there were bits and pieces in the middle where he was. It was he did what he did because
Yeah,
of duty,
the
not because he
writers
enjoyed it.
tried to give him a little bit more of a personality, a little bit more of a likable side.
Oh, I think he always had a personality. It's
Well,
just he was an evil personality, but
Well,
he
you know what
was he
like
try
was
to
the
give
joke.
Cisco's opposite.
more
I mean,
depth.
Yeah, well, he's like the Joker. You know, the Joker from Batman is absolute pure evil, but he has a really interesting personality, and everybody loves every scene that he's in. But he's absolute pure evil.
Mhm.
and then of course there's Garrick.
Garrick's not absolute pure evil. That's the thing.
Garrick is absolute pure good, but everything he says is a lie.
Wait, he's not pure good. He's
He'll
Well,
chaotic
stab you in the
good.
back the first chance he gets if he has a reason to.
He's
but
chaotic
he'll
good.
tell you that up front. I mean, except everything he says is a lie, even though he's always honest with you. He's an odd sort of crazy paradoxical contradiction. He is the embodiment of what makes philosophy drive people crazy.
Yeah, Garrick. Garrick is a lot like Jack Sparrow. Jack Sparrow reminded me of Garrick a lot because of how he is always lying. Well, you know, Sparrow isn't always lying, but he tells Garrick type lies. He lies to you by telling you the truth. Um,
Right.
you know, and he's got all these layers. You know, like Shrek. I mean, like an onion, and yeah, Garrick's. We have to have an episode on Garrick.
Yeah, we do. We
For
do.
now, I
Sure.
was going to say we've already talked about empire building because we talked
We're
about
running a little bit long anyway, so maybe
the
we'll have
last.
to wrap
The
it up.
last question I'd like to see us cover is: do you think Garrick is right or wrong about his cynical political attitudes, his view of the Federation? Um,
Hey, it's like
which
being like root beer.
oh yeah, that scene was great. But I mean, he several times he says to Doctor Bashir that the Federation is he expects the Federation to have analogs to everything Cardassia does. And he doesn't he dismisses as a premise the notion that the Federation could possibly have any moral superiority to Cardassia, despite his long-standing knowledge of the evils of the Cardassian system, which he's seen firsthand. He, I think, does not believe that the Federation is any better. He is a cynic. Um, Maybe toward the very, very end of the series, he comes to see the Federation in a somewhat more positive light as he sees, more and more. But in the beginning, he challenges Bashir's political assumptions of in of what's it called inherent Federation superiority. Um, so basically, he's a lot like a visiting Russian who is trying to debunk the notion of American exceptionalism. And as someone who actually believes in American exceptionalism, however unpopular that may be, I find Garrick's critiques um, actually somewhat compelling. Um, I think there are answers to many of them, but the way he challenges the attitude in a Socratic way is useful for keeping the Federation on the right track. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, it's easy for the Federation to ignore its flaws because it is just so good. And then
Yeah.
the flaws get out of control without somebody like Garrick to push things a certain way. In a lot of ways, Garrick always reminded me of the blind old wise man from Kung Fu.
How so?
Never seen.
Um, Well, Garrick is
But you mean as an archetype of kung fu movies, or do you mean a specific movie called Kung Fu?
no the original television series where David Carradine is in the Old West. The episode featured a series of flashbacks of his childhood learning kung fu, and it was an archetype of the blind kung fu master, the guy who taught him everything he knew every time he had to impart some little bit of
Mr. Miyagi.
yes. And Garrick is in a lot of ways that Mr. Miyagi type, especially to Dr. Bashir, because no matter what Garrick says and no matter what the other guys say, Garrick is a master spy, which means he observes everything, he sees everything, and part of seeing everything is being able to understand it all and make the connections to know what's going on. And he's just trying to teach other people how to see all the little pieces that make up that big picture and how to put it all together through his own screwy, zen-y kind of way.
Yeah. I think, though, of course, the most important thing about Garrick's character, above everything else, is that Garrick is a liar. And there's a book out, one of the first books that leads up to the DS9 relaunch series that does a really great job of capturing Garrick as spy, Garrick as exiled Cardassian, Garrick as a product of Cardassia, Garrick as exile. Did I say exile? All these different sides of Garrick's character, but he doesn't lie more than once or maybe twice in the whole book. And I'm like, somebody is missing this huge side to the character.
I'm still convinced that Garrick was, and always will be the head of the Obsidian Order. I don't care what anybody else says. I think that's exactly why he was where he was.
Wait, you mean he was still the head of the Obsidian Order even while he's on DS9?
Yes, because you had so many episodes where these Federation personnel are somehow granted audiences with the leaders of the Obsidian Order, which is one of the most secretive, elite spy agencies in the world, and yet everybody knows who's running it. Even though they never said it in the show, I've always been convinced Garrick is the real leader of the Obsidian Order.
Okay, next time then.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Garrick, and we'll get
next time is going to be the Garrick episode.
Wow, already. Okay.
And
we just came up with our new name, and we got to change it to Trekosophy now.
Yeah, well, the next episode, not every episode, but the next episode is going to be the Garrick episode, and I want you to get your stuff together, get your memory alpha links or whatever to try to defend that view.
All right, I can do that.
Because I'm going to propose the view that Garrick is the former head of the Obsidian Order and is tremendously disappointed over its decline under his predecessor, who he is constantly plotting to depose and get back in power, but he can't. And yeah, because I don't think he had that much power. I think he had a great deal of power. Anyway, next time we'll have to talk about Garrick, and we'll have to theorize about what the final answer about Garrick really was. If there even is one, because there's also the possibility that it's all a lie.
And on that note, this whole podcast has been a lie. So,
yes, live long and prosper. Station!
Thanks for joining us, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Trekosophy. I have to get used to our new name here now. And we'll hope to see you next time.
Thank you and good night.
Good night.